is that Pakistani air defenses, particularly the Chinese air defenses HQ-9, were breached in a significant way. There was extensive damage to Pakistani air bases, at least about a dozen of them, some of them rendered unusable, to the extent that Pakistan will now have to recalibrate any future escalation against India. But India also needs to win the narrative war. So it's now sending a group of parliamentarians, ruling party MPs as well as opposition MPs to foreign capitals in order to brief them about Operation Sindoor. Now, this is very similar to what the Vajpayee government had done back in the 90s in the aftermath of Kargil. But first, the big takeaway from Operation Sindoor. Defense sources have now revealed to CNN News 18 that over 600 drones were neutralized by India. That is a feat that is made possible by the swift deployment and the resolute response of the Indian Army's air defense systems. More than 1,000 gun systems and 750 short and medium-range missile systems were operationalized along the western border, and that basically transformed India's air defense network from peacetime posture to a full operational readiness almost overnight. Because remember, the Pahalgam attack and then the 2 weeks that India took to prepare for the response, and then eventually after Operation Sindoor is when Pakistan decided to escalate, and India had no choice but to tune up its air defense systems. Now, legacy weapons like the L-70, the Zu-23mm, the Shilkas, these were often underestimated in the era of high-tech warfare, but these systems were the ones that proved their mettle, emerging as highly effective point of defense systems against low-flying, hard-to-detect drone systems. At the tactical level, the operation also demonstrated the seamless functioning of the Joint Air Defense Center, which coordinated both kinetic and non-kinetic air defense responses in real time. So today, the Defense Minister Rajnath Singh praised exactly that, India's indigenous air defense systems, the precision strike on Pakistan-based terrorists, and subsequently in a way to deter the Pakistani escalation. He went to the Bhuj Air Force Station today. The Raksha Mantri from there highlighted that the operation of Sindoor and its fallout not only showcased India's military might, but also dealt a decisive blow to the enemy who thought that he could escalate by going up the escalation ladder, by going up the rung from across the border. But that was completely negated by India's air defenses.
ऑपरेशन सिंदूर अभी खत्म नहीं हुआ है। जो कुछ भी हुआ वह सिर्फ एक ट्रेलर मात्र था। जब भी सही समय आएगा तो हम पूरी पिक्चर भी दुनिया को दिखाएंगे। भारत में बनी ब्रह्मोस मिसाइल ने पाकिस्तान को रात के अंधेरे में दिन का उजाला दिखाई। जितनी देर में लोग नाश्ता पानी निपटाते हैं, उतनी देर में आपने दुश्मनों को निपटा दिया। कि नया भारत अब सहन नहीं करता, बल्कि वह पलट कर जवाब देता है।
So, in order to manage the narrative war, the information warfare, India is now sending a multi-party delegation abroad to various foreign capitals in a bid to try and articulate India's position. This will center its discussions on a five-pronged agenda. Congress Member of Parliament Shashi Tharoor will be leading this delegation. He's also, remember, the chairman of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on External Affairs. He will be leading the delegation that goes to the United States and then, of course, to Europe. Here's what this delegation aims to do. First, they will be detailing Pakistan's provocations that necessitated the operation. Second, they will be underscoring why Operation Sindoor was crucial and a crucial response effectively to these terror threats. Third, they will also convey the potential for future similar actions. Remember, all leaders from the Prime Minister to the Defense Minister have all been saying that Operation Sindoor has not been entirely ended, it has simply been paused for the time being. So any future similar action should also further the acts of terror occur. That will be India's position as well. Now, fourth, emphasizing the precise targeting of just terror hideouts during this operation. And fifth and finally, highlighting Pakistan's established role in fostering terrorism and its global repercussions. So as per government sources, the all-party delegation will travel to countries like the US, UK, South Africa, Qatar, UAE. But why do these countries matter? The United States, of course, the country which remains the world's most powerful country, unmatched military, intelligence and diplomatic influence, it has the leverage to pressure all countries through its aid, through its strategic influence. So the US needs to be brought on board, and there's been a degree of consternation with Mr. Trump's tweets, indicating a degree of mediation, if you will, to try and bring both India and Pakistan to the dialogue table. The United Kingdom is a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. It's a leading voice in global human rights. The UK holds diplomatic sway in international fora. It can shape narratives on terrorism. South Africa is a prominent African democracy. It's a BRICS member. It's the nation that holds regional influence in Africa. It participates in global peacekeeping and non-aligned diplomacy. Qatar plays a mediating role in many global conflicts, including Israel versus Hamas in Gaza. It shapes public perception across the Muslim world. It can help counter extremist narratives and monitor financing, particularly in channels that are linked to radical groups. And the United Arab Emirates is emerging as a key diplomatic player in the Middle East. With growing clout, the UAE closely aligns with India on counterterrorism. It has deported fugitives. It has publicly backed India's stand on Pakistan-sponsored terrorism in the past.
एक जमाना था जिस समय हमारी सेना का सर काटकर हमारा सीमा के अंदर फेंक दिया जाता था और हम लोग इंटरनेशनल एरिया पे जाकर के सिर्फ एक रिटन प्रोटेस्ट लेटर सबमिट करते थे। लेकिन आज का भारत ऐसा जगह में नहीं है। सारे पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज इकट्ठा होकर के नेशन फर्स्ट ये दुनिया को दिखाए, यही उद्देश्य है और इस उद्देश्य में हम लोग सफल रहेंगे।
Now, amid these claims and counterclaims over India hitting Pakistan's nuclear facilities during Operation Sindoor, there was panic of a nuclear leak, some speculation that there are flights from the US, flights from Egypt coming in. All of this has now been nipped in the bud. The global nuclear watchdog, the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, has said there was no radiation leak nor any radiation release from any nuclear facility in Pakistan. Remember, India's strikes hit an airbase in Sargodha, and there were reports that the base that is right next to it, the Kirana Hills, an underground nuclear storage facility, was also hit by that same strike. This has been denied by the Indian side as well. Now, was this panic from the Pakistani side fabricated? Was this panic around a potential nuclear hit the reason why the Americans got involved and the reason why India had to eventually de-escalate? The question begs to be answered. Here's an explainer to try and throw further light into that question.
Kirana Hills in Pakistan's Sargodha district, long believed to house nuclear storage sites. The controversy intensified after a question during an Indian military briefing and a viral memo claiming a nuclear incident. Adding to the narrative, US President Donald Trump claimed his administration brokered a ceasefire between India and Pakistan, averting a nuclear conflict that, quote-unquote, could have killed millions.
And we stopped the nuclear conflict. I think it could have been a bad nuclear war. Millions of people could have been killed.
India maintains that military pressure brought Pakistan to the table. Meanwhile, international whispers credit behind-the-scenes diplomacy, especially from the United States of America. So let's unpack this. Kirana Hills is a restricted military zone located just 8 to 20 kilometers from the Sargodha Air Base in Pakistan, one of the 11 key Pakistani military targets hit by India. A journalist's pointed question at the May 12th DGMO briefing asked whether India had targeted the hills, rumored to be a nuclear storage site.
Thank you for telling us that Kirana Hill houses some nuclear installation. We did not know about it. Okay. And we've not hit Kirana Hills, whatever is there.
Air Marshal Avdesh Kumar Bharti dismissed the claim with irony. Still, the speculation exploded online. A day later, a purported radiological safety bulletin from Pakistan's Ministry of Climate Change and Environmental Coordination surfaced online, claiming a radiation leak on May 11th in the Northern Administrative Zone during routine maintenance involving indium-192. The viral Pakistani radiation leak memo citing a mysterious isotope, namely indium-192, fanned fears of a nuclear incident. Fact checkers have since exposed it as fake, riddled with scientific and procedural errors. Now sample this. The correct isotope is iridium-192 and not indium-192. And it is used in oncology and structural testing and not typically associated with nuclear storage facilities. Also, the term Northern Administrative Zone is rather vague and not a standard administrative designation in Pakistan, raising suspicions of fabrication. The document's formatting and language too deviated from standard Pakistani government communications, lacking official seals or verifiable signatures. Yet, India was now accused, however inaccurately, of endangering a nuclear site. So why is Kirana Hills significant? Kirana Hills in the Punjab province of Pakistan is a 68 square kilometer restricted area under Pakistan's Ministry of Defence, 8 to 20 kilometers from Sargodha Air Base and 75 kilometers from the Kushab nuclear complex. Military analysts believe it contains underground tunnels for nuclear warhead storage, given its fortified infrastructure and strategic location. Pakistan's first use nuclear doctrine, designed to counter India's conventional superiority, makes Kirana Hills a critical asset. India's no first use policy and the 1988 India-Pakistan Non-Attack Agreement, or the NAA, which prohibits attacks on civilian nuclear facilities, underscore the site's sensitivity. Strikes near Sargodha Air Base raised fears of nuclear escalation, with some interpreting them as a signal of India's reach without violating the NAA. Air Marshal Bharti and the Ministry of External Affairs have denied targeting Kirana Hills, emphasizing strikes hit terrorist camps and military sites like the Sargodha Air Base. Visual evidence from the DGMO briefing showed damage to the airbase runways, not Kirana Hills. Open source intelligence and satellite imagery also confirmed strikes on Sargodha but found no activity at Kirana Hills. The site's tunnels are designed to withstand conventional strikes, and any damage would likely be localized and not catastrophic. More importantly, both nations have upheld the NAA, or the No Attack Agreement, since 1991, exchanging civilian nuclear facility lists annually. The 34th exchange happened just this January. Targeting Kirana Hills, even if a military site, would risk nuclear escalation, which India avoided. No radiation spikes were detected on public radiation maps near Sargodha or Kirana Hills. The IAEA, or the International Atomic Energy Agency, issued no statements and no medical emergencies were reported in Pakistan, as would be expected in a high-level leak. Also crucial is the Pakistani silence. Pakistan's military and government, including the spokesperson of Pakistani military, Major General Ahmad Sharif Chaudhry, made no mention of a leak, claiming Indian strikes hit quote-unquote empty hillside. Social media also speculated that a US Department of Energy aircraft was assessing radiation. Flight Radar 24 data did show a DOE plane in the region, but the same was transferred to Pakistan's Army Aviation back in 2010, suggesting routine monitoring and not a US operation. Also, claims of an Egyptian cargo plane delivering boron, which is used for radiation mitigation, were also doing the rounds. But they appear speculative and lack official confirmation from both Egypt or Pakistan.
Meanwhile, Major General retired Rajiv Narayanan is former ADGMO of the Indian Army. He's currently professor with the Indian Institute of Technology in Madras. Thank you very much, Major General, for speaking with us. A lot of speculation about whether India targeted or whether it actually struck some of these nuclear sites in Pakistan, particularly the Kirana Hills, just off the Sargodha Air Base. Officially, the Indian Air Force's position, the International Atomic Energy Agency, they've all said that no such attacks have occurred. There is no evidence of any radiation. However, why do you believe that this might have been the key factor which forced Pakistan to de-escalate?
There are
two, three things which I'll flag. Firstly, immediately around the time that the strikes took place, in fact, they took place, I would say, both at Kirana and at Chagai Hills. So, firstly, people should be clear that that is not the only place where they keep their nuclear warheads. They have 5 garrisons where they keep their land-based assets which are nuclear capable, their missiles. Obviously, those warheads which are immediately required would be somewhere near those garrisons. There are 4 air bases from where the nuclear capable aircrafts can fly, which are Mirage 35, JF-17 and of course the F-16. So there also the immediate requirement of the warheads would be there. The strategic reserve after that, to my understanding, have been kept at 2 places. One is the Kirana Hills near Sargodha and the other is the Chagai Hills near Jacobabad, which is also their nuclear test site. Once we hit it, the National Seismic Center of the US, they have registered 2 earthquakes. Yeah. Chagai Hills area, they have registered the seismic reading was 5.7 on the Richter scale. And at Kirana Hills, it was 4.4. That is around between 1:45 and 2 in the morning, around about the time when it has been struck. And subsequently in Kirana, 10th afternoon also it registered a 4.0 Richter scale measurement. But that doesn't mean an earthquake, like I have mentioned in many places. How do the people across the world know if some country has done a nuclear test? Mm-hmm. See, when there is an explosion of that level, there are vibrations which go through the earth, and the seismic sensors deployed all around the world, globally, they register that as an earthquake.
Okay.
Now, this is what happened. And when the Air Force says that we didn't hit the nuclear area, yes, you did not strike the nuclear warheads. No. When you have these deep tunnels in which such things are kept, the best way to neutralize it is to target the entrances and exits. When you target that, then whatever is inside is trapped. And then you need to clear it. And the planning is always there for a subsequent strike. That when they are at their peak of repair and recovery with all their equipment and trained manpower, strike again. Now they have to get their equipment from somewhere else, get some more trained manpower, the delay is more. So that is what I believe was done. But you hit the entrances.
Major General, how do you reconcile what your position is and what your suspicion has always been with the official statements that have been made by the Indian Air Force, the DG Air Ops, Air Marshal A.K. Bharti, as well as what the international watchdog, the nuclear watchdog, the International Atomic Energy Agency, which has come out and clearly said there is no evidence of any radiation. Are you saying India hit those nuclear facilities, but not the nuclear devices themselves or the nuclear warheads themselves, but it hit them in a manner in which, as you said, the entrances and the exits, in a manner in which they were rendered unusable?
When you're trying to teach a nuclear power a lesson, you don't go out telling everybody that I've targeted their nuclear assets. No, you won't do that. You sent a message. You hit their entrances. You did not hit their nuclear assets. It's difficult because it will going to be not at ground level. It would have been tunneled and underground facilities would have been made where these nuclear warheads would have been stored. Very difficult to penetrate. You won't. We don't have that kind of asset that the Russians and the Americans have. The Russians call it the father of all bombs and the Americans call it the mother of all bombs. We don't have that deep penetrator and exploding. No, we don't need it. You hit the side of the entrances and block that hillside. Okay. So nobody can go inside. He can't access that. So concurrently, what did you do? You hit their garrisons also, which had these nuclear assets, Gujranwala, Sargodha, land. And if you look at Air Rafiki Shahbaz, which is Jacobabad and Masroor, telling him that, look, don't try to be smart. We know where you are. And we can hit you pinpoint with less than a meter accuracy. You can't hide. Concurrently, you hit Noor Khan, which is their nuclear command and control center airbase.
Correct.
So obviously, openly in the press, he is not going to say that, yes, we hit that. And when he says we didn't hit the nuclear assets, he's telling the truth. We didn't. We hit the entrance. And that he didn't know Noor Khan had air assets, the nuclear assets, I would only say his smile is the giveaway.
Okay. Major General, we'll end that with a smile. Thank you very much. Major General Rajiv Narayanan, former ADGMO of the Indian Army and now professor at the Indian Institute of Technology in Madras. Thank you very much for joining us. But US President Donald Trump, he's claimed credit for mediating between India and Pakistan. He's claimed credit for brokering a ceasefire, a claim which India has outrightly rejected. But is this attempt more than just about claiming credit? Is Trump sending a message to China? Are India and Pakistan eventually just becoming proxies in what is a game of one-upmanship between the United States and China? Let's be very clear about this. More than 80% of Pakistani weaponry, its military arsenal today comes from China. India's, at one point of time, used to be heavily Russia dependent. More than 50% at one point of time used to be Russian weaponry, Russian equipment. Today, that is under 40%. And the country that India is buying more and more from, and the country which wants India to buy more and more from, is the United States. So how did the weapon systems of both these countries fare? And are India and Pakistan merely proxies in this great power game going on between the US and China? I decode. Two nuclear-armed longtime rivals in South Asia are once again facing off after a deadly terror strike on tourists in Pahalgam in Kashmir. But this time the stakes feel different and much higher. What is driving the shift this time around? That's because the South Asian region's key military alliance have changed. Key arms deals now reveal who stands with whom in this tense nuclear-armed triangle that is India, Pakistan and China. India has moved closer to the West over the last 20 years. Once a country that was proudly non-aligned is now buying billions of dollars of worth American and European weapons. Meanwhile, India has slashed arms purchases from Russia, which has been a partner since the Cold War. Today, about 1/5 of India's arms imports come from the United States. 2 decades ago, over half of that came from Moscow. Now that has dropped to just over a third. It is a sign of how fast the defense landscape is changing between India, America, and Russia. Pakistan, on the other hand, is headed in the opposite direction. Once a major buyer of American weapons, it is now leaning that much harder on China. China is where most of Pakistan's military hardware is today coming from. In fact, from 4.5 generation fighter jets to Corvette-class warships, and now increasingly armored aerial vehicles, Pakistan imports almost 80% of all its military equipment from China. This weapons realignment has dragged global superpower politics much deeper into South Asia's longest-running conflict. Washington sees India as a key partner to counter Beijing. China, in turn, has tightened its embrace of Pakistan, just as America grows closer to India. But India and Pakistan might be caught in a bigger clash which could shape the remainder of the 21st century, which is the one between America and China. India and Pakistan could be mere proxies in this larger battle. Tensions between India and China have also spiked in recent years, fueled by a long-standing border dispute. At the same time, US-China ties are at the lowest point, particularly since President Donald Trump launched a bruising trade war with Beijing. America has slapped tariffs as high as 145% on Beijing, something which Trump has suggested he will dial down if both sides meet at the negotiating table. It is a volatile brew. Shifting alliances, old rivalries, nuclear weapons, and 3 countries that are at the brink. It's a deadly cocktail where any single mistake could spin out of control. Over the last 2 decades, America has become central to India's defense plans. China is now filling that gap for Pakistan. After the April 22nd terror attack in Pahalgam, India struck back with Operation Sindoor. But this time, Washington was more openly supportive. Prime Minister Narendra Modi spoke directly with both President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance, who was here when the Pahalgam attack happened. American leaders have been urging caution, but their support between India and Pakistan is very clearly on the Indian side. Many in Delhi are seeing that as a go-ahead for retaliation. China has responded in kind, loudly backing Pakistan and calling Pakistan an ironclad friend. These shifting loyalties are now beginning to show on the battlefield. So any future war between India and Pakistan could play out something like this. US and NATO weapon systems on one side actively backing India, Chinese technology on the other supporting Pakistan. Not long ago, the Cold War shaped these sides and these ideologies. India stayed outside the formal blocs of America or USSR, but India leaned heavily on the Soviet Union for its weapons. Moscow, once upon a time, used to supply nearly 2/3 of all of India's military gear. Now that has changed. Pakistan took the opposite route. It tied itself tightly with the United States, helping America fight the Soviets in Afghanistan. In return, Pakistan got American gear, including the much coveted F-16 fighter jets, which helped reduce the gap between India and Pakistan's air powers. But both countries paid a price in the 1990s. After testing nuclear bombs, both countries faced American sanctions. Pakistan even had to wait for years to receive dozens of F-16s for which it had already paid money. All of that changed after 9/11. Pakistan once again became a key US partner, this time in the war on terror. Billions of US military aid followed. Washington was back as Pakistan's top military supplier. China was a close behind. Even as Pakistan was accused of sheltering Taliban leaders, and despite the fact that Osama bin Laden was found inside Pakistan, the American military kept sending money and weapons to Pakistan. But as American involvement in Afghanistan ended, Pakistan's value in Washington declined. China stepped up in the value chain. In the mid-2000s, China provided just under 40% of Pakistan's arms. Today, that number has doubled to 80%, according to data available from the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, SIPRI. India's shift has been just as dramatic. Between 2006 and 2010, Russia supplied about 70% of India's major weapons. In the last 10 years, that figure has dropped to 38%. Most of India's new hardware now doesn't come from Russia. It comes from the United States or France or Israel. There is one exception in all of this, and that is the F-16s which have been given to Pakistan. Despite all of these tensions between India and Pakistan, the United States continues to service and support the large fleet of F-16s. The Biden administration even approved a $400 million deal to maintain the large fleet of F-16s. Back in 2019, at the height of the Balakot strikes, one of those F-16s was shot down by an Indian jet, a made-in-Russia MiG-21 Bison, which was being commanded by Wing Commander Abhinandan, who fell into Pakistani territory. India accused Pakistan of breaking American rules by using the plane outside anti-terror operations. F-16s were not meant to be deployed against India, but the damage had already been done. This is the new arms race of South Asia. There are familiar players, but there are new partners. Pakistan with China, India with America, and there's a growing risk that old enemies who are now armed with new support may once again clash. This time, they've got far more powerful tools at hand. The shifting sands of South Asia carry a much deeper meaning. India and Pakistan may be mere proxies caught in the great power game between the United States and China. So I want to go across to Michael Kugelman. He's a South Asia analyst from the Woodrow Wilson Center in Washington, D.C. Michael, thanks for speaking with us. It's going to be a week now since India's Operation Sindoor and then the subsequent escalation, and eventually we had a de-escalation, a ceasefire last Saturday. Where do you see the situation between India and Pakistan going from here on hence?
Well, I think that the India-Pakistan relationship is going to be settling in for a deep freeze, which is quite notable given that over the last 4 years, the relationship had been relatively calm. There, of course, had been the LOC truce concluded in 2021. But now, I mean, to me, it seems that the relationship is at one of its lowest points in some decades. And even though we have a ceasefire and the fighting has stopped for now, the other, the non-military punitive steps taken by India in recent days, and in some cases reciprocated by Pakistan, have all remained in place, and that seems to offer little diplomatic space for any type of dialogue or discussion or anything like that. The ceasefire itself strikes me as rather fragile as well. And I think that the messages, the speeches from the leaders of Pakistan and India in recent days indicate that very maximalist positions are being taken on both sides. So a very tense situation will likely prevail on the subcontinent in the days and weeks ahead.
So, US President Donald Trump said a few days ago, and he continues to double down on this message, that he used trade to get India and Pakistan to drop their arms, to call for the ceasefire. He kind of diluted that stand, I think, yesterday, where he said, I won't say how I did it. What do you make of the Trump intervention, as it were? Because the government of India has been at great pains to say and to prove and to tell anyone who would care to listen that, look, the US had no role in this ceasefire. It was bilaterally arrived at by India and Pakistan.
Well, I mean, trade is something that is always on President Trump's mind, and certainly that includes foreign affairs. So I'm not surprised that he would bring up the trade issue, even in the context of this crisis. It seems highly unlikely that the U.S. would try to use trade as a direct pressure point to try to get each side to stop fighting. I think what would be perhaps more likely is that you might have had at one point, a U.S. official or two essentially saying that, it would be easier to conduct trade talks if the fighting has stopped. But I think that we should take with some grains of salt the earlier comments made by Trump about how he suggested that the notion of trade with the U.S. would be directly linked to the issue of needing to stop fighting. So absolutely, I wouldn't be surprised if at some point trade came up in the discussions, but I definitely don't think that it was a dominant part of these efforts on the part of the U.S. to try to conclude a ceasefire. But
Washington seems to be doing this sort of balancing act, a degree of hyphenation, if you will, between India and Pakistan. And India has been, trying for the last 20 years to dehyphenate between these two countries. India wants to be a great power. Its aspirations are to take on China. And Pakistan, India feels, is, in the little league. It's in the small league. But now, with all that Mr. Trump has said and all that has come out of the White House and the Trump administration, it seems like there is a degree of rehyphenation going on. How may that fare for US-India ties, you reckon?
Well, I mean, the last few days have not been good for U.S.-India relations. The messaging coming from President Trump, I think, has been not good at all for U.S.-India relations, though I think we need to be very candid. I don't think President Trump or anyone else in the U.S. administration wishes any harm for the U.S.-India relationship. There are so many strong strategic and commercial and other imperatives from the perspective of the U.S. that dictate that the relationship with India remains strong. But I do think that if President Trump continues to make the types of comments that he has in recent days, I think that might make it more difficult to try to get things back on track. I do suspect that many in New Delhi would like to simply think of this as a case of Trump being Trump, and he is unpredictable, and he'll say some unexpected things sometimes, and that you could just shrug that off and move on. But if we continue to have a few more days of President Trump making these comments that don't sit well in New Delhi, then that clearly will necessitate some challenges. That said, I would not be surprised if you have efforts on the part of the State Department and others in the U.S. government try to walk back some of the comments that President Trump has made in recent days. Because again, no one in Washington wants to see the relationship with India experience trouble.
All right, Michael Kugelman from the Woodrow Wilson Center in Washington, D.C. Thank you very much for joining us and putting that into perspective for our viewers. Now, one of the first and most decisive diplomatic strikes, even before this escalation militarily between India and Pakistan, was that India decided to put the Indus Waters Treaty in abeyance, and that continues. That decision has continued even though along the border there is now a ceasefire, a directive to the troops on either side to stand down. Under pressure now, Pakistan's minister has called for dialogue over the treaty. Remember, there are a couple of clauses in the treaty which India has wanted for a number of years now to try and renegotiate, but Pakistan has been playing hardball. Now, with this entire military crisis, India putting IWT in abeyance, Pakistan is coming back, or at least indicating that it wants to come back to the negotiating table. India, on the other hand, is in no mood to entertain that request. So the question is, what happens next? And is the IWT being in abeyance, now being linked directly to Pakistan's action on terror, is that one of the most significant gains that India has had from this chapter? Here's a deep dive.
Pakistan has written a formal letter to India, pleading for the resumption of the Indus Waters Treaty after its suspension. This diplomatic development comes amid heightened tensions between the two nations, particularly following Pakistan-backed terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir. The Indus Waters Treaty is a crucial water-sharing agreement signed between India and Pakistan in 1960. It allocated the waters of the Indus River system, which includes 6 major rivers: Indus, Jhelum, Chenab, Satluj, Beas, and Ravi. The treaty has been instrumental in ensuring the peaceful sharing of water resources for over 6 decades, despite the volatile relationship between the two nations. India's suspension of the treaty came as a direct consequence of the terror attack on April 22nd in Pahalgam, which claimed the lives of 26 civilians, predominantly tourists. India accused Pakistan of being complicit in the attack, which was attributed to a Pakistan-based terrorist group. In response to the continued support of terrorism by Pakistan, India invoked its national security interests, leading to the temporary suspension of the treaty, marking an unprecedented move since the agreement's inception in 1960. In the face of India's decision, Pakistan's Ministry of Water Resources urgently wrote to New Delhi, asking for the restoration of the treaty. The letter highlighted the critical importance of the Indus waters to Pakistan's agriculture industry and overall economy, warning that the suspension of the agreement could lead to a water crisis in the country. Pakistani officials have pleaded with India to reconsider, as they fear the suspension could spark broader geopolitical and humanitarian consequences.
पानी और खून भी एक साथ नहीं बह सकता.
India has been resolute in its response. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, addressing the nation, underlined the government's uncompromising stance. Water and blood cannot flow together, Prime Minister declared, signaling that terrorism and talks or terrorism and trade can no longer coexist in the bilateral relationship with Pakistan. India has repeatedly made it very clear that the Indus Waters Treaty can only be resumed once Pakistan irreversibly ceases its support for terrorism against India. According to Indian officials, Pakistan's actions have violated the goodwill upon which the treaty was founded. Despite India's hardline position, Pakistan's Ministry of Water Resources continues to push for diplomatic talks, arguing that the suspension of the treaty violates the core principles of cooperation and peaceful coexistence that have long been central to the agreement.
So there's a lot of disinformation, intelligence, counterintelligence has been going on in the aftermath of Operation Sindoor and the escalation that we saw between India and Pakistan. India firmly believes that a large number of Pakistani air bases were targeted, some of them rendered unusable. And it is this military differential which eventually got General Asim Munir to see reason and call for a ceasefire. Pakistan, of course, has been spreading a lot of disinformation, talking about Indian Rafales being brought down, air bases, including Adampur, being targeted, none of which there is evidence of on the ground, at least up until now. Let's try and make sense of this story, this whole disinformation war that's been going on. It's not just a war out in the front lines or in the skies, but also this disinformation war in cyberspace. Ryan Macbeth is an intelligence analyst. He's now joining us. Ryan, you've been claiming on social media for a few days now that some of these Pakistani claims are exaggerated, are disingenuous, and certainly there doesn't seem to be any evidence to back those claims. Can you elaborate a little more on why you have come to that conclusion?
You're absolutely correct. So a lot of this playbook came from China, and before that, the war in Gaza, where you used Hamas and pictures from cell phones, video from cell phones that are placed out of context to try to move the needle in the West to get people to believe a certain thing. And one of the things that we saw wreckage that was a MiG-21, which is not a type of plane that India currently operates in its inventory, in flames. And that was an example of Pakistan saying, hey, you know what? Let's try to put this narrative out there that this certain thing is happening, because enough people don't know what a Rafale or a MiG-30 or a MiG-29 look like, who can identify that this thing is wrong. And by the time the story actually gets out, it's too late and people have moved on. So essentially, Pakistan is taking a playbook from Hamas.
But Ryan, tell me this. I mean, the Pakistanis have been claiming for a while, since the first day, the 7th of May, when Operation Sindoor was launched and concluded, that they've hit 5 jets, a couple of Rafales, so on and so forth. The Indian side has steadfastly, up until now at least, they've said some air assets have gone down, but they've not said whether any Rafales have gone down. What can you say from whatever you've perused on the internet as to whether there's any truth to those claims or not?
So the truth is going to come out. India is a democracy, right? And sooner or later, there's going to be an investigation, or sooner or later, someone from a fellow is going to say, hey, we were servicing 18 planes, and now we're only servicing 16. I will also say that there's nothing wrong with losing planes. As crazy as this sounds, if you're going to be a democracy, you got to do the democracy thing and be honest when you're asked a question, as long as it's not operational security. And sooner or later, if planes have been lost, you're going to get an accounting of those planes, because there is a public budget for purchasing parts and purchasing maintenance for these planes. So right now, what we're seeing with the information war is, because the information war is moving faster than India knows what to do with. Essentially, India is fighting a war from 20 years ago, not a present-day war. Because of that, all you need to do is convince people that this is real and the truth doesn't actually matter. And if you have American politicians who think, hey, you know what, I can get a lot of traction online, I can get a lot of likes if I go on Pakistan's side and say, look at what Pakistan did, isn't that so amazing? If I think that can benefit me personally, I might actually go with that, even if I know or I think it's not the truth.
So, Ryan, one final word. A lot of chatter around Chinese weaponry, and obviously this is one of the few times in the recent past where they've been used in operation, they've been pressed into service. There are two sort of kinds of stories that are coming out about it. One which says that, look, their HQ-9 air defense systems were penetrated, their drones were not particularly effective, and so on and so forth. And then you have from the Chinese side, and I believe some of the Western presses also carry these reports, that the Chinese JF-17s, the fighter jets, have downed some Indian jets and so on. It's the first time that they've been operationally used, and they are right up there. They can give a run for its money to the F-16s and so on and so forth. What do we know objectively about Chinese weaponry and their efficacy or the lack of it in this India-Pakistan clash?
We don't have a lot of hard data, mainly because Chinese weaponry hasn't really been used, but anything that is a copy of a Soviet-type weapon, we can kind of get an idea of what that weapon system might do. And I can also say that it's 2025, and at this point, China knows how to make a long-range air-to-air missile, right? So really, people focus too much on the weapons and less on the system of systems. If you give me 20 fighter jets and an air controller, a person in airborne warning control plane that's floating above the battlefield using their powerful radar to coordinate everything like a symphony, that side has a much higher chance of winning than fighting against 20 jets that don't have that air coordination. So really, a lot of it comes down to systems. What systems are networked? What systems are sharing data? So I really wish people would get away from this weapon is better, or the JF-17 is better, or the Rafale is better. What it really comes down to is the data that you're sending and receiving accurate? Because weapons are great, but it's data that wins wars.
All right, Ryan Macbeth, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for joining us with your thoughts and perspective.
Thank you.
In his first overseas visit since returning to the White House, US President Donald Trump is on a whirlwind three-nation tour of the Gulf. He's touched down in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. The visit is already sending seismic ripples through the geopolitics of the Middle East. Dubbed the Gulf Reset, the three-day trip is being marked by lavish state receptions, landmark arms deals, and controversial diplomatic engagements. There is now an unmistakable shift in America's posture towards the Middle East. From unveiling a $140 billion weapons deal to endorsing a civil nuclear program for Saudi Arabia and accepting a luxury jet from Qatar, Trump's transactional diplomacy is in full swing. But the deeper tremors come from his unprecedented meeting with Syria's new leader, Ahmad al-Sharaa. He's a former jihadist who's turned national leader. And missing in all of Trump's whistle-stop Gulf tour was America's most stalwart ally in the region, Israel. In Riyadh, Trump unveiled the largest arms agreement in US history, a $142 billion weapons package which has fighter jets, missile defense systems, unmanned drones, and cybersecurity technology. Saudi officials hailed it as a partnership of protection, but the scale of the deal has raised eyebrows. Also grabbing headlines in Washington was the green lighting of a civil nuclear cooperation agreement with Saudi Arabia. Now, though it's been framed as a civilian program, it comes with clear geopolitical undertones. While Saudi Arabia has long desired nuclear energy, it has also made little secret of its intent to match Iran and its nuclear trajectory. Trump gave his nod to this deal, and this may be aimed at giving the Saudis enough leverage to stay in the diplomatic lane, while at the same time reminding Tehran about America's backing for Riyadh. He also prodded Saudi Arabia to join the Abraham Accords, which would normalize ties with Israel, but this would be at their own time. Trump realizes the Saudis would be loath joining hands with Israel at a time when Israel is accused of mass genocide in Gaza. Meanwhile, in Doha, Trump accepted, quite controversially, a $250 million luxury Boeing 747 jet from the Qatari government. He had painted this as a gift to the American people. He's going to be using this as a donation to the Trump Presidential Library, which he will use post-demitting office in 2029. Critics at home are already questioning the ethics of such an offering, saying it violates multiple rules. Perhaps the most astonishing development of the Middle East tour came in Riyadh, where Trump met with Syrian President Ahmad al-Sharaa. It is the first such meeting between American and Syrian heads of state in 25 years. Al-Sharaa is a former commander of an Al-Qaeda offshoot. He's emerged as Syria's new strongman after the fall of the Bashar al-Assad regime late last year. Al-Sharaa's rise from insurgency to the head of state has been nothing short of remarkable. For much of the 2010s, al-Sharaa was leading fighters who actively targeted American and allied forces in Syria and in Iraq. And yet, Trump posed for photographs with al-Sharaa, calling him a man who knows how to fight terror because he's lived through terror. American officials are already floating the idea of strategic pragmatism, arguing that al-Sharaa, although he's a former enemy, now represents a bulwark against Iranian expansionism and also fighting the remnants of ISIS in the region. And all of this is taking place even as Washington continues direct and indirect talks with Tehran over reining in its nuclear ambitions. There have been 4 rounds of talks that have been brokered by Oman and that have happened in the Omani capital, Muscat. While the details of what exactly has been achieved in these talks still remain sketchy, American government sources have been saying that the US is offering gradual sanctions relief to Iran in exchange for verifiable caps on uranium enrichment. Trump, who famously withdrew from the Obama-era JCPOA, which was a 6-nation deal along with Iran, he pulled out of that deal in his first term, but now he appears to be pursuing a fresh version of that same deal, but this time on Trump's terms.
Under the Trump administration, we're liberating...
This approach places Saudi Arabia, a longtime Iran hawk, in a bit of a delicate position. But over the last couple of years, in an effort mediated by the Chinese, there is a degree of normalcy between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Trump, who's wanting to undercut the Chinese and their growing role in the Middle East, has now done parallel engagements with these two sworn Gulf enemies. Noticeably absent from Trump's itinerary is Israel. It is a glaring omission given the long-standing US-Israel alliance and also at a time when there is growing turmoil in the region because of Israel's war in Gaza. Also, relations between Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu seem to have cooled off a bit in recent months, particularly over the Gaza war. The mounting civilian toll in Gaza, which has now crossed 50,000, is drawing global condemnation. Trump has publicly supported Israel's right to defend itself, but there is a limit to which he can overlook the mass atrocities that are happening in Gaza. There is also growing speculation that the Trump White House now sees Netanyahu as the obstacle to a broader regional realignment. By excluding Israel from his Gulf tour, Trump may be signaling that Washington's center of gravity in the Middle East is shifting. It's moving away from Tel Aviv to Riyadh. Officials within the Israeli government have expressed quiet concern that America may be moving towards a more balanced, or as they say, a neutral position in the Sunni versus Shia standoff, one that could dilute Israel's leverage. These developments point to a broader recalibration in America's Middle East strategy. For years, American foreign policy was framed around very clear lines: Israel against the Arab world, Saudi Arabia against Iran, and Syria was treated as a pariah state. Trump is now blurring those lines. He's pushing an agenda that prioritizes transactional diplomacy over traditional alliances. He values flexibility over ideology. The big question is, will this new approach hold? They have codenamed this operation Operation Sindoor. The Indian Army, through Operation Sindoor, has hit 9 targets.
You try to target our bases, you try to target our capital, or you try to target our cities, we will hit you so hard that you will not be able to fly your machine.
News coming out that nervous Pakistan is seeming to wave the white flag.
This is what Manoj Gupta is bringing for us, this piece of information that Pakistan wants to de-escalate.
As we slip into evening on May 10, Donald Trump, US President, has now announced that India and Pakistan have agreed to a ceasefire.
Donald Trump posting on Truth Social that both India and Pakistan have announced a ceasefire.
Co-presented by. This is News 18 Network. India's largest news network.
Situation in Balochistan seems to be spiraling out of control. There's a major crackdown by the Pakistani army is what we're learning. Internet and electricity have been shut down. There are new counter-insurgency operations that have started. This after the Pakistani army had to face the wrath of the Indian army, the attacks on Pakistani military bases by Indian side. Operation Sindoor has all rattled Pakistani army, which is now prompting them to target Baloch activists, Baloch leaders in Balochistan. Top Baloch sources have now told CNN News 18 that Pakistan military, after its defeat from India in Operation Sindoor, is escalating its excesses, is shifting focus from the eastern border to Balochistan now. These are the same tactics that we had seen in the past as well. This was done right after the 1999 Kargil war, post Balakot in 2019. After India's airstrikes, we had seen how the Pakistani army, in an attempt to redeem itself, had shifted its focus, tried to hit back at unarmed activists, at civilians in Balochistan. Remember, enforced disappearances in Balochistan, Army's excesses in Balochistan have been making headlines for decades together. Now it looks like the Pakistani army is repeating that particular pattern after its loss, after the kind of defeat it had to face after Operation Sindoor by India. We are getting you more voices from Balochistan to give us more details of what exactly is transpiring there, what the situation looks like. But for long, the Balochi people have been standing up against the civilian government in Pakistan, as well as the military establishment. The Pakistani military has been accused of excesses in Balochistan, of enforced disappearances as well. Now it looks like to try and redeem itself from what happened after Operation Sindoor, Pakistani army is shifting its focus back to Balochistan. Anand, my colleague, now joins us, getting us more details on this. Anand, what more can you tell us? What exactly is happening in Balochistan?
Well, Manoj Kumar Gupta getting us these assessments, even as there are many Baloch leaders who are turning towards Bharat and say that there is a Bharat-Baloch connection and that Bharat should openly support any movement by the Baloch to break free from what the Baloch claim to be forced occupancy of their lands, their territory, their minerals, their resources by the Pakistani army since 1948. The Baloch struggle is a long one, nearly 7 decades now. But now, right now, the immediate assessment is that the Pakistani army is now going to turn on to the Baloch and to try and mount a massive, what they would call a counter-insurgency move to break hell upon and unleash wrath upon the people of Balochistan, to try and somewhere gloss over the humiliation that they have faced because of the decimation that Pakistan has faced at the hands of Bharat. Now, and to try and salvage and divert the attention again. So if a Pahalgam massacre was a distraction from the Baloch problem and what happened with the Jafar Express issue, now again, because of the decimation of their air bases and also these entire terror tanzeem's headquarters at the hands of Bharat, in 90 hours, Pakistan was brought to heel and brought to its knees by the Bharatiya Armed Forces. They will turn towards the Baloch people. Why? There is a history to this. In 1999, post the Kargil conflict, there was unprecedented amount of military barbarism, dahshatgardi by the Wardi, the Pakistani Wardi, on the Baloch people, and that is documented. And that was to try and tide over the humiliation of the Kargil conflict. And
viewers, Pakistan is broken militarily and psychologically. Its nuclear weapons, spurred arrogance is all but gone. Gone, viewers. It's evaporated. Today, Pakistan is pleading with India. If on one day their water minister is writing to Prime Minister